Hello, everyone. This is Yesenia from Fullness of Life Counseling in Bradenton, Florida. I'm a therapist in private practice, currently seeing mostly adults. I have worked with children in the school system for 10 years, so I have a lot of experience. A couple, probably weeks ago, maybe at the end of May, I shared a post on children and anxiety. It wasn't my article, it was someone had written it. I believe it was the Child Mind Institute. And it had the title, Children Don't Tell You They're Anxious, They Tell You Their Stomach Hurts. And it got me thinking, because I got a response from it in terms of likes and shares. And I wanted to talk about that to the parents of children that are anxious, not just as a therapist, but also as a parent of a child that has struggled with anxiety at a young age. As a parent that has struggled with anxiety, I've shared some of my own story with anxiety before. If you've heard my interview with Latinx Therapy podcast, I was on there talking about anxiety and I shared some of my story with it. So as I came into awareness with anxiety, my experience with it, I also came into awareness of my child's experience of it. So I wanted to just share some things that I've learned about managing, how to help your child manage anxiety, because you, as a parent, are the best resource for your child. It's good to have a therapist, of course. It will help. But teaching yourself as a parent how to be effective in helping your kids manage their emotions is the most powerful thing you could do. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that. So let's just talk about anxiety. It's a feeling, right? It's a worry. Anxiety in itself is a God-given emotion. It's helpful. It's a messenger. It protects us and it helps us to survive. The problem is that it can become out of control and distorted in our minds. And it happens because of many things. The first is genetics. If a parent is anxious, typically a child could be genetically predisposed. And I'm not a scientist to cover the whys or the ins and the outs, but pretty much, just like we pass on hair color and eye color and, skin color to our children, genetically, we also pass on anxiety, predisposition to anxiety and depression. So that's the first thing, that it is genetically, predisposed. The second thing is personality. Just sometimes a child's temperament and personality can give way to being more anxious. So let's talk about, the article said that your child won't say, I'm anxious, because they don't have the words for it if you haven't taught it to them, but you can teach them so they're aware of how to identify anxiety in themselves. So a lot of times kids will complain about their tummy hurting. They may want to go to the bathroom a lot before a stressful situation. They may not want to separate from you, so there's separation anxiety. They may not want to participate in activities that you think are kid appropriate, but they don't want to. They may throw a tantrum. And you might think, well, they're being quote unquote spoiled, right? Or they're being, just rebellious. But really what may be happening is they're anxious. So having a verbiage for it. So let's talk about, I just want to cover three things. So there's a lot to be said on this topic, but I want to cover three things that you can do to help your child manage their anxiety. So the first thing is to listen to their experience of things without judgment. And as you listen, that's not the first thing, that's already part of the equation, but I guess maybe it's four. Listen and normalize the experience. Listen to what the child is saying. How does it feel for them? And normalize it. Don't judge them. Because a lot of times a child may say, I'm scared of doing this. And the first thing we want is to say, that's silly. We think we're helping them by minimizing their anxiety. But minimizing their anxiety or dismissing their anxiety only creates shame. Because if you as a parent or I as a parent am saying, that doesn't make sense, that's silly, that's not a good reason to be anxious, we're dismissing or minimizing their experience. And when we do that, we're telling them, and not in those words, but we're telling them that something's wrong with them. And if they feel that we're telling them something's wrong with them, then we're gonna create shame in them. That something's wrong with them, then they're not a good person, like they're broken somehow, and that they're not acceptable to us. So the first thing we have to do is normalize it and say, so let's just say first day of school. That's a very common experience. First day of school, new class, new teachers. My daughter gets very anxious because it's new. And so I always say, it's perfectly normal for you to be worried, anxious, because you're going to a new place and there's a new teacher and there's new friends. So first I normalize. The second, which is kind of goes with normalizing, is validating. I tell her, you have a valid reason for being worried or anxious. And then we do this. If I were you, if I was in your situation, I'd likely feel the same way. Now you can go even further than that. And if you've actually had an experience, like the first day of a job, you can say, you know, when I had to start my job, I also felt anxious, nervous, worried, whatever word they're using. So you validate them in saying, you relate to them and saying, not only do you have a right to feel that way, but I have felt that way before, and you give an example. So again, this is a lot of talking, right? So if you know that your child is prone to anxiety, this is why talking beforehand, and it helps them. Typically with an anxious child, you don't want to spring things on them right away, but you also don't want to give them that much time to think about it. And that's really hard, right? So my daughter is generally an anxious child. So I give her enough time to prepare when something's going to change or we're going to do something that's new to her, but not so much that it's going to give her more time to worry. So that's a parenting thing that we're always balancing. When is just enough? When is not too much? So you just have to feel out your child. Maybe you one day want to spring something on them last minute and see how they react. And maybe you see that that wasn't good and you change plans. Because isn't that parenting? You're just always gauging and reading your child. So normalize, you validate, you talk it through, and then you give them coping skills. Now, if you don't have coping skills for anxiety, this is when it helps for you to learn your own, like breathing, right? Because like right now I'm breathing really, I'm not getting enough air because I'm anxious doing this live. And so you would teach them to breathe, you know, inhale, a quick inhale and a slow exhale. So with kids, there's star breathing. You can print out a star chart and actually trace a star while they breathe, or you could just do square. So it's like in, out, in, out, in, out, in, out. So you teach them to in the shape of a square, and do that until they start to feel better. Now, why is that important? Because when our mind is registering anxiety, it's freaking out, it's going to slow the breathing and not bring as much oxygen to our brain, because it thinks that the body is under an emergency, under danger. So it'll reserve to protect the organs of our body. So oxygen comes down from the brain more into other parts of our body. So we have to take the deep breaths in to help our brain think clearly and really reason. That's why when people are anxious, they can't think straight. No matter what you tell them, if you say, stay calm or relax, they're not thinking clearly up here. We're not thinking clearly up there. So bringing in oxygen helps to think clearly. So the other thing you can teach your child is to do something with the energy. So something like Play-Doh. I always keep something squeezable, because sometimes anxiety is it's an energy that just needs to be released. So you might have them squeeze something as they're breathing. You might have them do some exercise to get some of that emotion out. And then bringing in tools that are helpful. A lot of our kids are already used to this, right? The phone technology. So what you could do is download some apps. I have really good experience with the Stop, Breathe, Think app for my child. And I would have her, we were going somewhere, she's anxious, while I was getting my other kid ready or myself ready, I would have her do her exercises on the phone, on the app. And so that's just a great way for you to use a technology to help your child. So look up apps for anxiety, pick one that works with your child, and have them do that while they're waiting. So normalizing, validating, and teaching your kid to cope is a great way to do it. Now, what we can't do all the time is prevent our kids from experiencing anxiety, right? It's really painful to watch your child suffer with a extreme emotion. And so it's very tempting to be like, okay, well, you don't have to do it, right? So like, oh, for example, I've seen this with school anxiety. So a kid is saying, I don't want to go to school, I'm anxious. They don't say that, but my stomach hurts. And the parent says, okay, you don't have to go. And then that becomes a pattern. So there's going to be things in our children's lives that they're going to have to overcome, and they can overcome it. They're resilient enough, and with your support, they can. So also being careful not to enable, be supportive, but not enable, that's the tricky part. So this is where I would suggest you as a parent going to a parenting class, taking your own therapy to help you cope, because parents need a lot of help. We need a lot of help. It's not easy. It's not, nobody taught us how to do it. We only have what we've experienced, and if we weren't taught how to manage emotions, then we need to learn. And there's a lot of resources out there. Another resource that I recommend for parents is the Gottman Emotion Coaching. It's a program you can purchase and self-teach yourself how to respond to emotions in appropriate ways. You can also read anything on emotional intelligence, and it also tells you how to respond to emotions. And so this is just what I wanted to share. It's nothing very in-depth, but the 3 things that I want you to remember is normalize anxiety, validate it, and then give your kids coping skills to get through it. And then when they've overcome it and they did it, they were successful, you want to really celebrate it and remind them. When I was validating, normalizing, I forgot to say, always remind them of an experience when they were anxious and they did it anyway, and they had a great outcome. So I might say to my daughter, this is the first time you go to this place and you don't know any kids, but tell me another time where you had to go somewhere new, but you made friends, because that's her biggest fear, right? Is I'm not going to make any friends. So she'll actually start to think about another time. And that gives her hope, and it gives her motivation to try and overcome her anxiety. So I know this is very short, but if you have any questions, please message me. I'll be happy to answer back, or if you want me to address something else. Like I said, I don't work with children right now. I prefer to work with the parents, but I do know therapists that are working with families and children that I can refer you to. I'm more interested in working with you as a parent to help you manage some of these scenarios with your child, and helping our children overcome anxiety, because it's very common. The article that I shared said that 1 out of 8 children have diagnosable anxiety. And so that can prevent, if we don't deal with it now, it's going to create other issues. If anxiety isn't dealt with, it can create social issues, sleep issues, disturbances, nutrition disturbances, and then down the road, substance abuse. And so we don't want that for our children. So the best thing we can do is deal with the problem now. So if your child is demonstrating signs of anxiety, be preventative and get the help that you need now as a parent to help you help them. Don't wait, because then the problem becomes greater. So this is it for today. Yesenia Retta, Fullness of Life Counseling in Bradenton. And I also see people online anywhere in Florida. Have a great day, happy Friday, and have a great weekend.